The case made by the oppressors in the specific context we've been talking about today is that Muslims or Arabs are all violent terrorists, a bloodthirsty mob of barbarians who will behead you or blow you up the first time you drop your guard. When I see an IDF graphic declaring X amount of, quote, terrorists killed, where they obviously arrived at that number by simply assuming everyone they killed was a terrorist, it makes me wonder how many times in history the size of an enemy military force was arrived at by simply counting the bodies afterwards, civilian or not. Going along with these sorts of narratives requires you to accept a racist othering of groups of people. There are inherent enemies, you have to believe, people who are born bad because of their race or religion or whatever, and so discriminating against them is not only right, it makes good sense. In relation to that, I want to start to close out today by thinking about a question I've seen asked and have been asked myself as well, and it's this. Jewish people have, many times in history, been subject to that sort of racist othering. They've been portrayed as inherently untrustworthy outsiders who subvert society to their own ends, blamed for a whole variety of societal ills which were not their fault, and been subject to the worst sorts of racial discrimination and oppression. So how is it that Israel, the self-proclaimed Jewish state, is now the one perpetrating many of those same crimes? How can they be forcing Palestinians off their lands and creating an international diaspora of refugees? How can they be carrying out against the Palestinians many of the same crimes that Nazi Germany carried out against Jewish people? And I have two answers for questions like this. And the first is quite simple. Zionism is not synonymous with Jewishness, and in fact there is a long history of Zionist anti-Semitism. Not all Jewish people are Zionists, and not all Zionists are Jews. One of the most striking images I've seen from this recent conflict is a video of the Israeli police attacking ultra-Orthodox Jewish residents of Jerusalem. Many ultra-Orthodox Jews are anti-Zionist for various reasons. The police in this video were allegedly called in to take down Palestinian flags in the neighborhood. This is how the Zionist state treats Jewish people who step out of line. And stories like this have been all too common. An Israeli teacher was put into solitary confinement for criticizing the Israeli military on social media. The Israeli police crack down hard on anti-war protests in Israel. The editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post writes articles about how anti-Zionist Jews are not representative of the Jewish community and are only technically, but not really Jewish. We need to view them as lost to our people and treat them as such, he says. Even protests organized by anti-war Jewish groups in other countries often get dismissed as anti-Semitic. Also, as an example of just how far Zionist anti-Semitic rhetoric can go, let me tell you about Itzik Zarka, an activist for Benjamin Netanyahu's political party, pictured here embracing Netanyahu. Last year, Zarka was caught on video shouting at protesters, quote, Ashkenazim, whores, may you burn in hell, referring to Jews of Eastern European origin. I am proud of the 6 million that were burned. I wish that another 6 million will be burned, Zarka said at the time, referencing the Holocaust. So yes, it really does go that far. There are two groups of people who try to equate Zionism with Jewishness. One are far-right racists, opportunistic, anti-Semitic bigots who capitalize on the unpopularity of what Israel is doing by pointing and saying, see, that's what the Jewish state is doing, so that's what the Jews are like. The other group are Zionists themselves, who want to lay sole claim to what Jewishness is and who lash out violently at Jewish anti-Zionists. There is even a Zionist tendency to look down upon Holocaust survivors and their descendants. Israeli tech blogger Hillel Fuld displayed this in a recent Twitter post where he says, the weak Jew who was led to the gas chambers, that Jew was left behind, and now there's a new Jew. This new Jew has F-16 fighter jets and Merkava tanks. This assumption that the people killed in the Holocaust were killed because they were weak, and because the ones who killed them were strong, is just absurdly offensive, and mirrors the Nazi rationale for their mass killings, that they were purifying society by killing off its weaker parts. One post from the Zionist organization Jew Belong called descendants of Holocaust survivors sanctimonious for calling for a ceasefire. It also says, "I want the goddamn hostages back," as if that idea is in opposition to a ceasefire, when it is in fact the lack of a ceasefire which is endangering the hostages. Hamas recently offered to return all the hostages they have in exchange for a ceasefire and Israel releasing Palestinians it's holding in prison. Netanyahu rejected the offer, which angered the families of the hostages understandably. A ceasefire and the hostages being released come hand in hand. They are the same idea, they are not opposed. Whereas on the other hand, the IDF have shown that they are a danger to the people they are ostensibly trying to rescue. Even if hostages are dropped right into their lap unarmed and waving white flags, the IDF still might shoot them. So that's the first answer to the question of how the so-called Jewish state could commit such horrible crimes anyway. Zionism and Jewishness are not at all synonymous, and in fact, Zionism is often anti-Semitic. But there's another answer to this question, and it starts with asking a